There are cases in forensic pathology that test every assumption you have about the nature of death, the limits of medical science, and what the human body can endure. After 15 years of conducting autopsies and examining the deceased, I thought I had seen every possible variation of how life ends and what secrets a body can reveal after death. I was wrong. My name is Dr. Sarah Chen, and I am a board-certified forensic pathologist at the Metropolitan Medical Examiner's Office. Over the course of my career, I have performed over 3,000 autopsies, testified in countless criminal trials, and helped families find answers about the deaths of their loved ones. I have examined victims of homicides, accidents, suicides, and natural deaths. I have seen bodies in every conceivable state of preservation and decomposition. But the case I am about to describe challenged everything I understood about post-mortem examination and the biological processes that occur after death. It involved a 34-year-old software engineer named Marcus Rivera, whose death appeared straightforward until the moment I made my first incision. What I discovered during that autopsy defied medical explanation and continues to disturb me 18 months later. Before I begin, I want to emphasize that everything I am about to tell you is documented in official medical examiner records, witnessed by multiple colleagues, and verified through extensive testing and consultation with specialists across the country. This is not a story of supernatural phenomena or unexplained mysteries. This is an account of medical findings that challenged our understanding of human physiology and the process of death itself. The case began on a Tuesday morning in September, when Marcus Rivera was found deceased in his apartment by his roommate, David Kim. According to the initial police report, David had returned from a business trip and discovered Marcus lying on his living room couch, apparently having died during the night. There were no signs of trauma, no evidence of struggle, and no indication of foul play. Marcus appeared to have simply died peacefully in his sleep, which, while tragic for a 34-year-old, was not particularly unusual from a forensic perspective. Young adults can die from various undiagnosed medical conditions, including cardiac arrhythmias, aneurysms, or other silent killers that leave no obvious external signs. The responding officers noted that Marcus was lying in a natural position on the couch, covered with still playing. His laptop was open on the coffee table, showing that he had been working late into the evening. A blanket with the television half-finished cup of coffee sat nearby, and there were no medications, alcohol, or other substances visible in the immediate area. David Kim told investigators that Marcus had seemed perfectly healthy when David left for his business trip 3 days earlier. Marcus had no known medical conditions, took no prescription medications, and maintained what appeared to be a healthy lifestyle. He exercised regularly, did not smoke, and consumed alcohol only occasionally and in moderation. The initial scene investigation suggested a natural death, possibly cardiac in origin, which would require an autopsy to determine the exact cause and manner of death. Marcus's body was transported to our facility that afternoon, and the case was assigned to me for examination the following morning. I began my external examination of Marcus Rivera at 8:30 a.m. on Wednesday, September 14th. Present during the autopsy were Dr. Michael Torres, a forensic pathology resident, Jennifer Walsh, our senior autopsy technician, and Detective Lisa Park from the Metropolitan Police Department, who was conducting a routine investigation into the circumstances of death. Marcus Rivera was a well-developed, well-nourished adult male who appeared consistent with his stated age of 34 years. He measured 5 feet 11 inches in height and weighed 178 pounds. There were no obvious signs of trauma, no defensive wounds, and no evidence of recent medical intervention. However, As I began my detailed external examination, I noticed several unusual findings that immediately caught my attention. Marcus's skin had an unusual pallor, not the typical grayish-white color we expect in deceased individuals, but rather a subtle luminescent quality that seemed to emanate from beneath the skin's surface. More significantly, when I checked his body temperature using our standard digital thermometer, I found that Marcus's core body temperature was 82 degrees Fahrenheit. Given that he had been dead for approximately 12 hours, based on the timeline provided by his roommate, this temperature reading was impossible. After death, body temperature typically drops at a predictable rate of approximately 1 to 2 degrees per hour, depending on environmental conditions. Marcus had been found in a climate-controlled apartment with an ambient temperature of 71 degrees. After 12 hours, his body temperature should have been very close to room temperature, certainly not 82 degrees. I asked Jennifer to check the thermometer calibration and take additional readings from different locations on the body. All readings confirmed that Marcus Rivera's body was maintaining a core temperature significantly higher than what was medically possible for someone who had been deceased for 12 hours. Dr. Torres suggested that perhaps our timeline was incorrect, that Marcus had died more recently than we had estimated. But when I examined other post-mortem changes, including rigor mortis and liver mortis, they were consistent with the 12-hour time frame. Marcus showed full rigor mortis throughout his body and fixed lividity patterns that indicated he had been in the same position for an extended period. The combination of findings was medically contradictory. Marcus showed clear signs of having been dead for 12 hours, yet his body temperature suggested he had died within the past 2 or 3 hours. This was my first indication that Marcus Rivera's case would be unlike any autopsy I had previously performed. I proceeded with the internal examination, beginning with a standard Y-shaped incision from the shoulders to the sternum and then down to the pubic bone. As I made the initial incision through the skin and subcutaneous tissue, I encountered another impossible finding. Marcus Rivera was bleeding. Not the minimal oozing or seepage that can sometimes occur during post-mortem examination, but actual arterial bleeding that pulsed rhythmically as if his heart was still beating. I immediately stopped the procedure and checked for vital signs, placing my stethoscope on his chest and palpating for a pulse at various locations. There was no heartbeat, no respiratory effort, and no response to stimulation. By every measure we used to determine death, Marcus Rivera was deceased. Yet blood was flowing from the incision site in a pattern that suggested active circulation. Dr. Torres and Jennifer Walsh both witnessed this phenomenon, and Detective Park observed the entire examination. I asked Dr. Torres to document the bleeding pattern with photographs while I collected blood samples for immediate analysis. The blood that flowed from Marcus's incision was bright red, indicating high oxygen content, which was another medical impossibility. After death, blood typically becomes dark and coagulates as oxygen is depleted and clotting mechanisms cease to function. Fresh, oxygenated blood should not exist in a body that has been deceased for 12 hours. I continued the internal examination with extreme caution, uncertain what other impossible findings awaited discovery. When I opened the chest cavity and examined Marcus's heart, I found what appeared to be a normal, healthy cardiac muscle with no signs of disease, trauma, or abnormality that would explain his death. But as I lifted the heart to examine it more closely, something happened that made Jennifer Walsh gasp audibly and caused Dr. Torres to step back from the examination table. The heart contracted. A single, powerful contraction that squeezed blood through the cardiac chambers and into the major vessels, creating a pressure wave that I could feel through my gloved hands. I immediately checked the cardiac monitor we use during autopsies, but it showed no electrical activity. The heart had contracted mechanically, without any detectable electrical impulse. Over the next several minutes, Marcus Rivera's heart continued to contract at irregular intervals, sometimes waiting 5 minutes between contractions, sometimes beating 3 times in rapid succession. Each contraction was strong and coordinated, pumping blood throughout his circulatory system, despite the absence of any measurable brain activity or respiratory function. I documented each cardiac contraction with precise timestamps and measurements. The heart would remain completely still for anywhere from 30 seconds to 8 minutes, then suddenly contract with the force of a healthy, living organ. The contractions showed no pattern or rhythm that corresponded to any known cardiac condition or post-mortem phenomenon. Dr. Torres suggested we contact our chief medical examiner, Dr. Patricia Williams, who had 30 years of experience in forensic pathology. When Dr. Williams arrived 20 minutes later, she observed 3 separate cardiac contractions and confirmed that she had never witnessed anything comparable in her entire career. The examination of Marcus's other organs revealed equally disturbing findings. His liver appeared healthy and functional, showing none of the typical post-mortem changes we expect to see in deceased tissue. When I made incisions into the liver parenchyma, the tissue bled profusely and showed cellular architecture consistent with living tissue. Under normal circumstances, liver cells begin to deteriorate within minutes of death as oxygen and nutrients are no longer delivered through circulation. By 12 hours post-mortem, we would expect to see significant cellular breakdown and tissue changes. Marcus Rivera's liver showed no such deterioration. His kidneys presented the same impossible preservation. The renal tissue appeared fresh and viable, with clear demarcation between cortex and medulla, and blood vessels that remained patent and functional. When I sectioned the kidneys for examination, they released a stream of what appeared to be freshly filtered urine. This was medically impossible. Kidney function ceases immediately upon death as blood flow stops and the filtration mechanisms shut down. Yet Marcus Rivera's kidneys were apparently continuing to produce urine 12 hours after his death had been pronounced. Dr. Williams requested that we pause the autopsy and contact several specialists for consultation. She had worked on cases involving delayed death pronouncement, hypothermia-related preservation, and rare metabolic conditions. But nothing in her experience provided a framework for understanding what we were observing. Over the next hour, we were joined by Dr. James Mitchell, a cardiologist from the University Medical Center, Dr. Angela Foster, a nephrologist who specialized in unusual kidney pathology, and Dr. Robert Chen, a biochemist who had studied cellular metabolism in extreme conditions. Each specialist examined Marcus Rivera's body and confirmed that his organs showed signs of continued biological function, despite the absence of brain activity, respiration, or coordinated cardiac rhythm. Dr. Mitchell used a portable echocardiogram to examine heart function and documented several strong contractions that occurred without any electrical stimulus. Dr. Foster collected urine samples and confirmed that they showed normal specific gravity and chemical composition, consistent with active kidney filtration. Dr. Chen took tissue samples from multiple organs for immediate cellular analysis and found that the cells maintained normal membrane integrity and showed signs of ongoing metabolic activity. We were witnessing what appeared to be selective organ function in a deceased individual. Marcus Rivera's brain showed no electrical activity, and his respiratory system was completely non-functional. Yet his cardiovascular, hepatic, and renal systems continued operating as if he were alive. The most disturbing aspect of these findings was not just their medical impossibility, but their implication for our understanding of death itself. If Marcus Rivera's organs were continuing to function, was he truly dead? Had we somehow misdiagnosed his condition? Or were we observing a previously unknown state that existed between life and death? Dr. Williams made the decision to temporarily halt the autopsy and move Marcus Rivera's body to our specialized observation unit, where we could monitor his condition continuously while consulting with additional experts. This was the first time in the history of our medical examiner's office that an autopsy had been suspended due to continued organ function in a deceased individual. Over the following 24 hours, Marcus Rivera's body was monitored by a team of specialists who documented the ongoing biological activity. His heart continued its irregular contractions, his kidneys produced measurable quantities of urine, and his liver maintained normal enzymatic function despite the absence of conscious brain activity or voluntary respiratory effort. Temperature monitoring showed that his core body temperature remained elevated, fluctuating between 79 and 84 degrees Fahrenheit. This thermal regulation suggested some form of metabolic activity that was maintaining cellular function above ambient temperature levels. Blood samples taken every 4 hours showed that his blood chemistry remained remarkably stable. Oxygen levels, pH balance, electrolyte concentrations, and protein markers all fell within normal ranges for a living individual. Yet neurological testing confirmed complete absence of brainstem reflexes and cortical activity. Dr. Mitchell attempted to explain the cardiac activity as some form of residual electrical activity in the heart muscle itself, independent of brain control. The heart has its own pacemaker cells that can sometimes continue functioning briefly after death. However, the duration and strength of Marcus Rivera's cardiac contractions far exceeded anything documented in medical literature. Dr. Foster theorized that the kidney function might represent some form of passive filtration driven by the intermittent cardiac contractions. But the quality and chemical composition of the urine suggested active tubular function that required living cells and coordinated physiological processes. Dr. Chen's cellular analysis revealed the most disturbing findings. Under microscopic examination, Marcus Rivera's tissue samples showed cellular activity that was indistinguishable from living tissue. The cells maintained normal morphology, showed active protein synthesis, and demonstrated membrane transport functions that require significant energy expenditure. These findings challenged the fundamental definition of death itself. Medical death is typically defined as the irreversible cessation of circulatory, respiratory, and brain functions. Marcus Rivera showed absent brain and respiratory function, yet his circulatory system continued operating and his cellular metabolism remained active. By the second day of observation, Marcus Rivera's condition had not changed. His organs continued their impossible function, while his brain remained completely inactive. His body showed no signs of decomposition, no bacterial overgrowth, and no cellular breakdown that would normally begin within hours of death. The medical team faced an unprecedented ethical and legal dilemma. Could we continue with the autopsy and complete the examination of someone whose organs were continuing to function? Were we dealing with a living person in some form of coma, or a deceased individual whose body was exhibiting unknown post-mortem phenomena? Dr. Williams contacted the Hospital Ethics Committee, the State Medical Board, and legal counsel to determine how we should proceed. The case raised questions about the definition of death, the limits of medical intervention, and our obligations to what might be a living person despite the absence of consciousness or voluntary function. The legal consultations provided little guidance for our unprecedented situation. Death certificates in our jurisdiction required documentation of irreversible cessation of cardiopulmonary and brain functions. Yet Marcus Rivera presented a case where some functions had ceased, while others continued operating. No legal precedent existed for handling a body that defied the standard medical definitions of death. After extensive discussions with hospital administrators, legal counsel, and the state medical examiner's office, We received authorization to continue monitoring Marcus Rivera while pursuing additional testing to understand his condition. The decision was made to treat this as a unique medical phenomenon requiring investigation rather than a standard forensic case. On the third day of observation, we began noticing subtle changes in Marcus Rivera's condition that added new dimensions to the mystery. His skin, which had maintained that unusual luminescent quality since the beginning of our examination, began showing patterns of color variation that seemed to pulse in rhythm with his irregular heartbeat. Dr. Torres was the first to notice these changes during his morning observation rounds. He documented areas of Marcus's skin that would shift from pale white to a subtle pink coloration, then return to the baseline luminescent appearance over periods of several minutes. The color changes appeared to follow the path of major blood vessels, suggesting that circulation was indeed occurring despite the impossible circumstances. More disturbing was the discovery that Marcus Rivera's hair and fingernails were continuing to grow. Hair and nail growth requires active cellular division and protein synthesis, processes that should cease immediately upon death. Yet measurements taken over 72 hours showed clear evidence of continued growth at rates consistent with normal living individuals. Dr. Foster conducted additional renal function tests and found that Marcus's kidneys were not only producing urine, but were actively concentrating waste products and maintaining electrolyte balance. The kidneys were performing complex filtration and reabsorption functions that required coordinated cellular activity across millions of nephrons. This level of kidney function was impossible to maintain without conscious neural control and adequate blood flow. Blood chemistry analysis revealed another impossible finding. Marcus Rivera's blood showed signs of active immune function. White blood cells were present in normal concentrations and showed responsive changes when exposed to foreign substances in laboratory testing. His immune system was apparently continuing to function and respond to stimuli despite the absence of brain activity. Dr. Chen expanded his cellular analysis to examine tissue samples from multiple organ systems. Under electron microscopy, the cells showed active mitochondrial function with normal energy production pathways. The cellular powerhouses were continuing to generate ATP and maintain cellular processes exactly as they would in a living person. These mitochondrial findings were particularly significant because cellular energy production typically ceases within minutes of death as oxygen delivery stops and metabolic pathways shut down. Marcus Rivera's cells were somehow maintaining aerobic metabolism and energy production 12 hours after he had been pronounced dead. The team decided to conduct more invasive testing to understand the scope of biological activity occurring in Marcus Rivera's body. Dr. Mitchell performed a cardiac catheterization to directly examine heart function and blood flow patterns. The procedure revealed active blood circulation through major vessels, with pressure gradients and flow rates that indicated a functioning cardiovascular system. Most remarkably, the cardiac catheterization showed that Marcus Rivera's heart was not only contracting, but was responding appropriately to changes in blood volume and vascular resistance. When Dr. Mitchell introduced contrast dye into the coronary arteries, the heart muscle responded with increased contractile force, suggesting that cardiac reflexes were functioning normally. These cardiovascular findings contradicted everything we understood about post-mortem physiology. The heart was not simply showing residual electrical activity or mechanical contractions, but was demonstrating coordinated, responsive function that required intact neural pathways and cellular communication systems. Dr. Foster's expanded kidney function tests revealed that Marcus Rivera's renal system was performing even more complex tasks than initially observed. His kidneys were actively regulating blood pressure through hormone production, maintaining acid-base balance, and producing erythropoietin to stimulate red blood cell production. These functions required sophisticated cellular machinery and regulatory mechanisms that should not exist in deceased tissue. The hormone production findings led to additional endocrine system testing. Blood samples showed normal levels of thyroid hormones, adrenal hormones, and insulin, suggesting that multiple gland systems were continuing to function. Marcus Rivera's body was maintaining homeostasis through complex hormonal feedback loops, despite the absence of conscious control. Dr. Williams brought in Dr. Elizabeth Harper, a neurologist specializing in consciousness disorders, to conduct additional brain function testing. Dr. Harper used advanced EEG monitoring, brainstem reflex testing, and neuroimaging studies to evaluate Marcus Rivera's neurological status. The neurological examination confirmed complete absence of cortical brain activity, brainstem reflexes, and any form of conscious awareness. Brain imaging showed normal anatomical structures with no evidence of trauma, stroke, or pathological changes that would explain his condition. Yet the brain showed no signs of the cellular death and breakdown that should occur within hours of oxygen deprivation. Dr. Harper described Marcus Rivera's neurological state as unlike anything documented in medical literature. His brain showed preservation of cellular architecture and tissue integrity, consistent with living tissue, yet demonstrated no measurable electrical activity or functional capacity. The combination of preserved brain tissue with absent brain function raised disturbing questions about consciousness and the relationship between physical brain structures and mental awareness. Was Marcus Rivera's consciousness somehow intact but undetectable by our current testing methods? Or had consciousness truly ceased while cellular function continued? By the end of the first week, Marcus Rivera's condition had stabilized into a pattern of continued organ function, without consciousness or voluntary control. His cardiovascular system maintained regular circulation, his kidneys processed waste and regulated fluid balance. His liver metabolized substances and produced essential proteins, and his endocrine system maintained hormonal equilibrium. Yet he showed no response to external stimuli, no voluntary movement, and no sign of conscious awareness. Brain monitoring continued to show complete absence of electrical activity despite preserved tissue structure. He existed in a state that defied medical classification, neither fully alive nor completely dead according to standard definitions. The medical team expanded to include specialists from multiple institutions who traveled to examine this unprecedented case. Experts in cardiac electrophysiology, renal physiology, cellular biology, and neurology all confirmed that Marcus Rivera's condition challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of biological death. Dr. Sarah Kim from the National Institutes of Health arrived to coordinate a comprehensive research protocol. She brought equipment for advanced cellular analysis, genetic testing, and biochemical studies that might provide insights into the mechanisms maintaining Marcus Rivera's impossible biological state. Initial genetic analysis revealed no mutations or abnormalities that would explain his condition. Marcus Rivera's DNA showed normal sequences for all genes related to cardiac function, cellular metabolism, and neurological development. There was no genetic basis for his ability to maintain organ function without conscious brain activity. Biochemical studies showed that Marcus Rivera's cells were producing proteins and maintaining cellular structures exactly as expected in living tissue. The molecular machinery of life was continuing to operate despite the absence of conscious control, suggesting that cellular function could persist independently of higher-order neural coordination. Dr. Kim theorized that Marcus Rivera might represent a previously unknown state of biological suspension, where cellular and organ function could continue without consciousness. This state might occur under specific circumstances that we did not yet understand, possibly related to the timing and manner of his initial collapse. The research team began investigating the events leading up to Marcus Rivera's death, looking for clues that might explain his unusual post-mortem condition. They interviewed his roommate David Kim again, examined his apartment more thoroughly, and analyzed his recent activities for any factors that might have contributed to his current state. David Kim provided additional details about Marcus Rivera's behavior in the days before his death. Marcus had been working on a particularly challenging software project that required long hours and intense concentration. He had mentioned feeling unusually tired, but attributed this to work stress and irregular sleep patterns. More significantly, David recalled that Marcus had been experimenting with meditation techniques and breathing exercises as part of a stress reduction program. He had been practicing these techniques for several weeks, often spending hours in deep meditative states that left him feeling refreshed but somewhat disconnected from his surroundings. The meditation connection intrigued Dr. Kim, because advanced practitioners sometimes achieved states of consciousness that involved slowed heart rate, reduced oxygen consumption, and altered brainwave patterns. Could Marcus Rivera's meditation practice have somehow contributed to his current condition by allowing him to enter a state where cellular function could continue without normal consciousness? This possibility led to consultations with experts in consciousness studies and meditation research. Dr. Michael Zhang from the Center for Consciousness Studies examined Marcus Rivera's condition through the lens of altered states of consciousness and documented cases of extreme meditative states. Dr. Zhang noted similarities between Marcus Rivera's condition and rare cases of advanced meditators who had achieved states of suspended animation during deep practice. However, these documented cases typically involved conscious individuals who could return to normal awareness, unlike Marcus Rivera's complete absence of consciousness. The investigation into Marcus Rivera's final days revealed one additional significant detail. His laptop analysis showed that he had been researching topics related to consciousness, out-of-body experiences, and the relationship between mind and body in the hours before his death. His browser history included scientific papers on consciousness studies and meditation practices designed to separate awareness from physical sensation. These findings suggested that Marcus Rivera might have been deliberately attempting to achieve altered states of consciousness through his meditation practice. Whether his current condition resulted from these practices or represented an unrelated medical phenomenon remained unclear, but the correlation was too significant to ignore. As the second week of Marcus Rivera's observation began, we made a discovery that would fundamentally alter our understanding of his condition and force us to confront possibilities that challenged the very foundations of medical science. Dr. Kim had been conducting routine cellular analysis when she noticed something unprecedented in the tissue samples. Marcus Rivera's cells were not just maintaining normal function, they were actually improving. Under microscopic examination, his cellular structures showed enhanced organization, increased mitochondrial density, and protein synthesis rates that exceeded normal healthy tissue. This finding contradicted everything we knew about post-mortem cellular changes. Cells should deteriorate after death, not optimize their function. Yet Marcus Rivera's tissues were somehow becoming more efficient and organized with each passing day, as if his body was undergoing some form of biological enhancement rather than decay. Dr. Torres documented temperature fluctuations that followed increasingly complex patterns. Marcus Rivera's core temperature would rise to 86 degrees during periods of intense cellular activity, then drop to 78 degrees during quieter phases. These thermal cycles seemed to correspond with peaks in organ function, suggesting some form of internal regulation that we had never observed before. Most disturbing was the discovery that Marcus Rivera's blood chemistry was not just remaining stable, but was showing improvements in multiple markers. His cholesterol levels had dropped to optimal ranges, inflammatory markers had disappeared entirely, and blood sugar regulation had become more precise than typically seen in healthy individuals. Dr. Foster found that his kidney function had progressed beyond normal parameters into what could only be described as super-physiological ranges. His kidneys were filtering toxins and maintaining electrolyte balance with an efficiency that exceeded the capabilities of healthy organs. The renal tissue showed structural adaptations that improved filtration capacity and waste elimination. These enhancements extended to his cardiovascular system as well. Dr. Mitchell's follow-up cardiac studies revealed that Marcus Rivera's heart muscle had developed increased contractile strength and more efficient pumping mechanisms. His coronary arteries showed improved blood flow patterns, and his cardiac output had actually increased since the initial examination. The liver function tests presented equally impossible results. Marcus Rivera's hepatic tissue was processing nutrients, metabolizing toxins, and producing proteins at rates that surpassed normal liver function. The organ appeared to be operating at peak efficiency while simultaneously showing structural improvements that enhanced its metabolic capabilities. Dr. Kim expanded her genetic analysis to look for any cellular changes that might explain these enhancements. What she discovered challenged our understanding of human biology at the molecular level. Marcus Rivera's cells showed increased expression of genes related to cellular repair, energy production, and stress resistance. His genetic material was somehow directing enhanced biological function despite the absence of conscious control. The gene expression patterns resembled those seen in organisms with extended lifespans or enhanced resilience to environmental stressors. It was as if Marcus Rivera's cellular machinery had activated dormant genetic programs designed to optimize biological function under extreme conditions. Dr. Harper conducted additional neurological assessments using more sensitive equipment borrowed from research institutions. While Marcus Rivera continued to show no conscious brain activity, the new testing revealed subtle electrical patterns in deep brain structures that had not been detected by standard monitoring equipment. These deep brain signals were extremely weak and occurred at frequencies far below normal neural activity, but they showed organized patterns that suggested some form of minimal neurological function. The signals appeared to coordinate with the cyclical organ function changes, implying that some level of neural coordination was occurring despite the absence of consciousness. The discovery of residual brain activity, however minimal, raised new questions about Marcus Rivera's true neurological state. Was he experiencing some form of consciousness that we could not detect, or were these electrical patterns simply reflecting the coordination required for his enhanced organ function? Dr. Zhang brought in specialized equipment used in consciousness research to investigate whether Marcus Rivera might be experiencing awareness at levels below our detection threshold. The testing involved monitoring for brain responses to various stimuli while measuring cellular activity throughout his body. During these consciousness assessments, the research team observed phenomena that defied explanation. When specific auditory stimuli were presented, Marcus Rivera's cellular activity would increase in coordinated patterns across multiple organ systems. His heart rate would subtly change, his kidney function would fluctuate, and his liver metabolism would shift, all in response to sounds that should not register in an unconscious individual. More remarkably, these responses showed learning patterns over repeated testing sessions. Marcus Rivera's biological reactions to familiar stimuli became more refined and coordinated, suggesting that some form of information processing and memory formation was occurring despite his apparent unconscious state. The team began testing whether Marcus Rivera could respond to more complex stimuli. When presented with mathematical problems through audio recordings, his brain showed those subtle electrical patterns in regions associated with analytical thinking. When played music, different neural areas activated in patterns consistent with auditory processing and emotional response. These findings suggested that Marcus Rivera's consciousness had not disappeared entirely, but had somehow relocated to levels of brain function that our standard testing could not reliably detect. He appeared to be processing information and forming responses through biological pathways that operated below the threshold of measurable awareness. Marcus Rivera's condition stabilized after 3 weeks of observation, his enhanced biological functions continuing indefinitely while consciousness remained undetectable. We ultimately issued a death certificate, though every medical principle told us this classification was inadequate. His body was eventually transferred to a specialized research facility where monitoring continues to this day. The case forced our medical examiner's office to develop new protocols for handling deaths that challenge conventional definitions. We now maintain equipment for extended observation periods and have established consultation networks with consciousness researchers and cellular biologists. Marcus Rivera taught me that death is not the binary state I had always believed it to be. There exists a liminal space between life and death where biological function can persist and even enhance itself while consciousness retreats to levels we cannot measure or understand. His case remains classified in our records not as death, but as biological transition to an unknown state. I left forensic pathology 6 months after completing Marcus Rivera's investigation. I could not continue conducting standard autopsies while knowing that death itself was far more complex and mysterious than our medical training had prepared us to understand. The certainties that had guided my career for 15 years had been permanently shattered by encountering a case that existed beyond the boundaries of known science. Today, I work in medical research, investigating consciousness disorders and the relationship between cellular function and awareness. Marcus Rivera's case continues to influence studies into the nature of death, the limits of human biology, and the possibility that consciousness operates through mechanisms we have yet to discover. The most haunting aspect of Marcus Rivera's condition was not the medical impossibilities we documented, but the realization that consciousness might persist in forms we cannot detect. If awareness can exist independently of measurable brain activity, then every death I had previously examined might have involved experiences and perceptions that went completely unrecognized by medical science. Marcus Rivera remains in that liminal state 18 months later, his body maintaining enhanced function, while his consciousness dwells in realms beyond our ability to measure or understand. His case stands as a testament to how much we still do not know about the fundamental nature of life, death, and human awareness. The boundaries between living and dead are not as absolute as we believed. Marcus Rivera proved that these states exist on a spectrum we are only beginning to comprehend, challenging everything medicine thought it knew about the moment when life transitions into death, human consciousness, and the mystery of death itself.